The front face of this concept is lit like a piece of architecture, not a vehicle. And the moment I saw it, I stopped scrolling. Before we get into it, this is an AI-generated concept design. It does not exist in any factory. No one is building it. No one is selling it. It is pure imagination. And that is exactly why it is worth analyzing. Because when you remove real-world constraints, you see what design could become. What you are looking at is one of the most resolved motorhome concepts I have come across. Two-tone body, turbine wheels, a continuous light signature that runs the entire length of the vehicle, and something at the lower midsection of this concept that I genuinely have not seen executed like this before, and I am saving it for when we get there. Here's what we are covering: the exterior from front to rear, a full interior breakdown based on what the proportions tell us, the powertrain logic, and my honest verdict. Let's start at the front. The first thing design does is communicate intent. Before a vehicle moves a single meter, its face is already making an argument. And this concept's argument is loud, specific, and, I think, genuinely well constructed. Look at that front face. You have a large illuminated panel dominating the lower fascia. Not just a light bar, not just a DRL strip, a full geometric light frame, layered rectangular signatures stacked inside each other, anchored by a diamond emblem dead center. That diamond is doing real work. It is not decorative. It is the focal point that the entire front face radiates outward from. Design school would call this a clear visual hierarchy. Everything leads your eye to that emblem, then pushes it back out through the light layers. That is intentional. That is considered. What does it communicate? Prestige, stillness, the kind of confidence that does not need to shout. This front face is not aggressive. It is authoritative. There's a difference, and this concept understands it. Moving to the body, the two-tone split is doing serious heavy lifting here. Gloss black on the lower third, deep, almost liquid, pearl platinum on the upper body, light, clean, almost architectural. The line where those two surfaces meet is not a trim piece or a chrome strip. It is a continuous LED light signature that runs from just behind the front face all the way to the rear of the vehicle. One unbroken line of light. When you're standing 50 meters away watching this concept approach at night, that single line is the only thing you see, and it tells you everything about the vehicle before you can read any other detail. That is the kind of design decision that separates concept work from production compromise. The roofline deserves its own moment. It's high, necessarily so, given what the interior proportions are likely promising, but it does not feel bloated. The leading edge above the cockpit features what appears to be a glass panel or skylight integrated flush into the roofline rather than planted on top of it. That detail alone tells you the designer was thinking about the interior experience first and working outward, not the other way around. The side profile gives us the full story of this concept's proportions. The window band along the living section is dark tinted, panoramic, and flush. No visible frames, no rubber seals breaking the surface. Glass to body ratio is high, higher than almost any production motorhome I have analyzed, which means the person living inside is surrounded by light and landscape in a way that most motorhomes even luxury ones, simply cannot offer. Then there's the entrance, mid-body, a retractable glass door, frameless, wide, the kind of entrance that does not feel like you're boarding a vehicle. It feels like you're entering a room. That transition from outside world to interior space is one of the most underanalyzed aspects of motorhome design. This concept gets it right. Now, the wheels. Turbine-style multi-spoke rims, dark finish, and they're sitting on what appears to be a 6-wheel configuration, dual rear axle. Let me be clear about what that signals. Dual rear axle is not a styling choice. It's a structural statement. It means this concept is imagining a gross vehicle weight that a single rear axle cannot handle, which means the interior mass being proposed here is substantial, which means the living space we are about to walk through is not a compromise. It's a full residential build on wheels. And now the detail I mentioned at the start, the one I have not seen executed like this before. Midsection, lower body, deployable solar panels, not roof-mounted, not fixed, deployable, angled outward from the lower body like solar wings, positioned to catch direct ground-angle sun when the vehicle is stationary. 3 panels visible in this render, tilted at approximately 30 to 40 degrees. This is not solar as an afterthought. This is solar as an architectural feature, integrated into the body design, visible from the exterior, and positioned where the angle of the sun actually hits most efficiently during midday hours. I think this is the most forward-thinking single detail on this entire concept, and we're going to come back to it in the powertrain section. First, let's go inside, because the exterior has been making promises, and I want to find out if the interior can keep them.
We do not have interior renders for this concept. What we do have is one of the most information-rich exteriors I have analyzed. And exteriors, if you know how to read them, will tell you almost everything about what is happening inside. Think of this as detective work. I will show you the evidence. You can follow the logic. Start with ceiling height. Those turbine wheels appear to be sitting on tires in the region of a 22 to 24-inch diameter. Using that as our scale reference, the overall vehicle height is likely sitting somewhere between 4.2 and 4.5 meters. Subtract the chassis and floor structure, roughly 80 to 90 centimeters, and you are looking at an interior ceiling height somewhere between 2.1 and 2.4 meters throughout the living zone. That is stand-up height, comfortable stand-up height, not the crouched, neck-bent experience of a mid-range motorhome. The kind of ceiling height where you genuinely forget you are not in a building. That matters more than almost any other interior dimension, because ceiling height is the first thing your body registers when you walk into a space. Before you notice the kitchen, before you notice the bed, you feel the ceiling. And this concept is telling us the ceiling feels right. Now let's map the zones. The habitable length, from just behind the cockpit bulkhead to the rear wall, based on the exterior proportions, I would estimate somewhere between 8.5 and 10 meters. That's significant. Here's how I think the designer intended that space to be divided. The cockpit zone occupies the forward section, roughly 1.5 meters behind the driver and passenger positions. Given that windshield angle and the elevated seating position visible in the render, the cockpit is designed as an experience, not just a workspace. You are sitting high, surrounded by glass, with a view angle that most sports cars cannot match. If this concept includes autonomous highway capability, and given its overall positioning, I think it almost certainly imagines that, then the cockpit transitions from a driving environment to a lounge environment at the touch of a button. The steering column retracts, the seats rotate, the cockpit becomes the best seat in the house. Behind the cockpit, I would expect a lounge zone of approximately 2 to 2.5 meters. This is the social heart of the concept, the space where the panoramic side windows do their most important work. Natural light flooding in from that flush glass band, views at seated eye level. If the designer has done their job, and the exterior suggests they have, this is the space where you feel the landscape moving around you rather than past you. That is the difference between a window and an experience. The kitchen zone most likely occupies the midsection, positioned to take advantage of the structural access points near the entrance door. In a concept at this level, you are not looking at a two-burner hob and a microwave. You are looking at induction cooking, integrated refrigeration, and surface area designed for actual meal preparation. The storage philosophy in a concept like this would almost certainly run vertical, floor-to-ceiling cabinetry rather than overhead lockers, because vertical storage feels residential, not vehicular. Moving toward the rear, the sleeping zone. Position relative to the rear axle is critical here. You want the bed forward of the rear axle, not over it. Over the rear axle, you feel every road imperfection amplified through the suspension. Forward of it, you are in the smoothest ride zone on the vehicle. A designer thinking about the lived experience, and this one clearly is, places the sleeping quarters here without compromise. Bed orientation in a concept of this length almost certainly runs longitudinally, head toward the rear, feet toward the living zone. This maximizes the usable width of the bed and allows for a view window at the sleeping end. Imagine lying in bed and looking out at a landscape through a rear or side window. That is not luxury as a specification, that is luxury as a daily experience. The bathroom. This is where motorhome design usually collapses, even at the high end. Water management, gray water capacity, ventilation, these are the engineering problems that turn ambitious bathroom designs into disappointing ones in production. But this is a concept, so let's follow the logic of what the exterior space allows. The lower body depth and the dual rear axle configuration together suggest a chassis with significant underfloor storage capacity for water tanks, which means a walk-in shower is not a fantasy here, it's a spatial reality. A wet room format, full ceiling height, glass partition, proper drain, is entirely consistent with what the exterior is proposing. Smart systems. Climate control in a concept at this level would not be zoned in the traditional sense, two settings for two ends of the vehicle. It would be learned, behavioral, a system that tracks occupancy patterns, sun position relative to the glass panels, and external temperature to predictively manage interior comfort before you notice you need it. Not reactive climate control, anticipatory climate control. That is the difference between a smart home and a truly intelligent one. And that continuous light strip on the exterior, inside I would expect that same design language to continue, ambient lighting integrated into surfaces rather than mounted on them, light as architecture, not as fitting. This interior, if built, would not feel like a motorhome. It would feel like the most considered small apartment you have ever been in, one that happens to move.
If this concept were ever engineered for reality, the propulsion conversation starts and ends in one place, full electric.
Here is why that is not just an environmental statement, it is a design logic statement. An internal combustion powertrain of the scale required to move a vehicle this size and weight introduces vibration, heat management requirements, exhaust routing, and noise levels that are fundamentally incompatible with the interior experience this concept is proposing. You cannot build a space that feels like a five-star apartment and then put a diesel engine under it. The two things are in direct conflict. Full electric removes that conflict entirely. No vibration signature through the floor, no exhaust heat bleeding into the underfloor storage zones, near silence at highway cruise. The interior experience this concept is promising requires full electric. It is not optional. Battery capacity in a near-future production scenario would need to be substantial. We're looking at a vehicle likely in the 25,000 to 35,000 kilogram range fully loaded. For real-world reference, the heaviest current electric coach platforms are operating in the 400 to 600 kilowatt-hour range for meaningful range. A concept at this level, with the interior systems load those solar panels suggest, would be targeting something closer to 600 to 800 kilowatt hours. That is not science fiction. The cell technology to achieve that already exists. The packaging is the engineering challenge. Now, those deployable solar panels. I want to be specific about their role because it is easy to overstate what rooftop or body solar can do on a vehicle this size. Solar is not your primary range extender. The math simply does not work at current panel efficiency levels. What solar does brilliantly is sustain interior systems when the vehicle is stationary. Climate control, lighting, water heating, connectivity systems, the kind of loads that on a conventional motorhome drain your leisure battery overnight. On this concept, with 3 deployable panels at optimal angle, you're looking at a system that could genuinely run interior systems indefinitely in good sunlight without connection to shore power. That is not a marginal gain. For off-grid living, that is the difference between a 3-day stay and a 3-week stay. Dual motor, dual axle configuration, if engineered, gives this concept traction on surfaces that a single drive axle motorhome cannot access. Not off-road in the traditional sense, but loose gravel, moderate inclines, wet mountain roads, the kind of terrain where a destination worth visiting tends to live. Autonomous highway capability. The cockpit proportions suggest it, the sensor integration points on the front fascia suggest it. In a 2035 to 2040 production scenario, this is table stakes technology for a vehicle at this positioning level. All right, honest take. What this concept does genuinely well, and I want to be specific, is the relationship between the exterior light architecture and the interior living experience. That continuous LED strip is not decoration, it is a spatial marker. It tells anyone looking at this vehicle from the outside exactly where the living zone begins and ends. And inside, that same design language almost certainly continues as ambient integrated lighting. The exterior and interior are speaking the same design language. That coherence is rare. Most concepts get the outside right or the inside right. This one appears to have thought about both simultaneously.
What seems impractical, and I think this is worth saying clearly, is the deployable solar panel mechanism at that lower body position. The concept is right about the angle logic. Ground level solar during midday hours is genuinely more efficient than flat roof solar, but the mechanism required to deploy and retract three large glass panels from the lower body, seal them against weather when retracted, and protect them from road debris at highway speed is a significant engineering problem. It is not unsolvable, but it is the detail on this concept where the gap between imagination and production reality is widest. The most impressive single detail, and this is what I would point to in a design school critique, is the front face. Specifically, the decision to use a diamond emblem as a central anchor for the entire light composition. It gives the front face a focal point that most motorhome concepts lack entirely. Most concepts scatter their design energy across the fascia without a clear center of gravity. This one has one, and everything radiates from it. That is a design school lesson in visual hierarchy executed correctly. One thing I would change: the roofline. It is well proportioned. I said that during the walk around, and I meant it, but I think there's a missed opportunity at the very rear. The roofline appears to end in a relatively conventional taper. A concept this resolved deserves a rear roofline treatment that completes the story the front face starts. A cantilevered overhang, a glass rear wall, something that makes the rear as considered as the front. Right now, the rear is the weakest point of the composition. What this concept signals about where luxury mobility is heading is this: the boundary between architecture and vehicle is dissolving. The best motorhome concepts of the next decade will not be designed by people who think about vehicles. They will be designed by people who think about spaces. And this concept is evidence that that shift is already happening in imagination, which is always where it starts. This is a concept. It is fictional, it is AI generated, and it is still one of the most resolved motorhome concepts I have analyzed on this channel. If you were speccing the off-grid power system on something like this, solar roof panels for maximum area, or deployable ground angle panels for maximum efficiency, which would you choose? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. If this kind of design analysis is what you come to YouTube for, subscribing is simply the most efficient way to make sure you don't miss the next concept. There are more coming.